The bar was the kind that kept its light low on purpose. The booths sunk into shadow like comfortable secrets. A neon sign hummed behind the taps, casting a wash of blue on lacquered wood. Laughter rose and fell like tide. Cheap, practiced, easy. She liked the anonymity of it. After the day she'd had, anonymity felt like oxygen. He walked in with the kind of stride that announced rank without a uniform. Broad shoulders, the slightly bruised confidence of someone used to people moving for him. He had a presence that made other men straighten and other women look. He brought a halo of attention, and then, like bad perfume, a smaller halo of entitlement. He ordered a round for his table, and then, because bars reward bravado, he ordered another for the person behind the counter. She looked up from wiping a glass. The man looked at her with the curiosity of someone who thought people were ornaments to be admired and catalogued. "You," he said, voice easy like a knife. "What's your call sign?" The question landed like a joke in a language she didn't speak. She blinked. It wasn't about an actual radio handle. He was testing boundaries, daring her to be clever or compliant. He smiled the small, proving smile of a man who expected a prize. She could have laughed. She could have answered with a quip, "Why? Do you want clearance to land?" And left it there, a sparring of wits and an amused crowd. But he kept looking, like a man waiting for validation that he could name someone like he owned them. And that look was an expectation that she'd be small. She hadn't been small all her life. She had been taught to read a room as weapon and sanctuary. She had been taught to breathe through chaos so clarity could find her. For a beat, she searched for the right reaction. To quip, to deflect, to make him the joke. He didn't wait. He picked up his glass, leaned forward as if crossing a line required physical movement, and flicked the drink toward her. The liquid arced, a bright smear in the dim, and landed across her shoulders and chest with a wet slap. The bar held its collective breath, those tiny islands of silence between the music and the neon. She froze. It wasn't the shock of the cold on her skin. It was the old reflex that rose when surprise met harm. Freeze first, measure second. For a moment her face was a mask, eyes still, mouth working on a single, silent syllable. People called it stunned. Her body called it assessment. Her hands were sticky with the residue of the gin and lime as she stepped back. The captain laughed, a harsh sound that didn't quite fill his throat. The men at his table whooped and slapped shoulders. Someone barked a laugh like an escort of approval. She had been the subject of slights before, of small violences that landed like a series of paper cuts. But this was a new scale. It demanded a choice. Let it be a thing that happened to her, clean up, keep working, consume the shame. The pragmatic path, or turn it into something that happened to him. Her mouth formed words, slow, deliberate. "You spilled your drink." He smiled again, as if that were amusing. "I ordered it for you." For a mad second, she thought of striking back. She pictured slamming a glass down across his knuckles, was grateful she'd never become a person who acted on the first blood in her belly. She pictured calling him by his name and watching his face register surprise. She pictured 1,000 quiet, satisfying things. None of them felt like victory worth having. She took a breath, slow, trained, and said, "I don't have to give you anything." The bar hummed, and a few heads turned toward the confrontation, the human magnet that demands spectacle. The captain rose, towered over her with the intent of a man who thought power was a height you could maintain forever by placing yourself above. He leaned in so close the smell of his cologne hit her like a foreign country. "You don't know who you're talking to, sweetheart. Call signs matter." The pet name, sweetheart, dropped like an insult made of cheap glass. She could see the angle. Call signs were his territory, his play. Demanding one was like demanding a story from someone who owed you none. She remembered then a voice from a lifetime ago, another woman, older, who taught her to name things precisely. "If he calls you names, choose one you can live with," the older woman had said. "If he doesn't, don't give him the satisfaction." She dried her hands on a towel because that's what bartenders do. Make ritual out of the small tasks to calm the edges of an evening. She tilted her chin. The act said, "I am still at my job." The act said, "You do not own me." You're making a scene," he said, like a man surprised the world objected to him. "You're making me make a choice." There it was, the challenge. He wanted performative obedience. He wanted the moment captured by his table, passed around later as proof. He wanted to be the man who could make a woman freeze with a flick of a wrist. She chose not to give him that actor's delight. She reached under the counter, not for a weapon, for a phone. Fingers steady, she hit record, the little red light a private witness. She lifted the phone so that it caught him, caught his hands, the way they trembled with arrogance when they expected applause. She didn't scream. She didn't call him out by name. She spoke into the cool, glowing rectangle with a voice that didn't ask permission. "This is harassment," she said. "You threw a drink on me." A hush deepened. The captain laughed then, the sound of someone embarrassed trying to sound in control. "It was an accident," he said. She was cheeky. "Accidents don't fly the way you just did," a man at the end of the bar said, voice steady. People started to murmur. A woman near the window stood. "That was nasty," she said, a plain sentence that held more power than eloquence. The captain's smile flickered. He looked to his table, seeking validation. Some eyes darted away, uncomfortable. He was tethered to a moment he had created to feel important, and now the rope was fraying. She could have let it be done right then, the small justice of a public apology or the bartender asking him to leave. She wanted more than a hurried, whitewashed apology for being rude. She wanted him to see the real consequence of making a person shrink for his amusement. She posted the video. It was a social media move, blunt and sure, the kind that turns small humiliations into public conversations. She uploaded the clip with a caption that named the act without dramatizing. She didn't invent. She let the footage speak. A man demanding call sign, a drink thrown, a woman frozen, a phone recording. The internet is a fickle jury. Sometimes it yawned. Sometimes it chewed. This time it bit. Within hours the clip had been shared by hundreds, then thousands. Men apologized, some genuinely ashamed, others through the safe distance of a keyboard. Women wrote stories of similar nights when they had been objectified and then silenced. The bar's website got nasty comments, and then protective ones. The captain's name, details about him, began to surface, pieced together by strangers who played detective with the same patience they used to scroll through old photos. He called the owner of the bar, demanding the video be taken down, calling her a liar and worse. The owner, a small woman with a fierce jaw, told him to leave. He could have stormed out, dignity intact if he wanted it. Instead, he chose to rage. He called friends in high places. He posted a denial. He demanded proof that he'd been anything but a gentleman. Proof arrived in the form of multiple witnesses who stepped forward, not because they wanted to be heroes, but because the shame of silence had become heavier than the risk of speaking. A man at the bar recounted how the captain had bristled when someone joked that a woman should be seen and not heard. A server told of a night the captain insisted on accessing a staff-only area to meet the owner. People who had once laughed with him now saw him in a new light. Small, entitled, brittle. The captain's unit heard. The chain of command listened. There were things in the military you could survive and things you couldn't. A reputation matters as much as a rifle. His superiors initiated an inquiry. The investigation, slow, methodical, was a different kind of pressure. It did not hum or shout. It moved like a shadow, inevitable and quiet. She watched it unfold from the small stage of her life behind the bar. She watched messages about courage and apologies and outrage flood her feed. She watched rumors bloom and then curdle. She watched the captain go through the rituals of someone denied his pedestal, denial, anger, bargaining. At a point, he sent her a message, short, contrite, the kind of apology that smelled of fear more than regret. She didn't open it. The inquiry concluded what the video had shown: harassment, conduct unbecoming. He faced administrative reprimand, a demotion, whispers that would follow him to other places. It was not a criminal trial. It was a reckoning of reputation. Some would say it wasn't enough. Others said it was a start. She was not naive about justice. She knew systems could bend around men like him, that careers could weather storms if the right people looked away. But this was not her final aim. She had wanted, in the moments after the drink hit her skin, to refuse the narrative that she would be small. She had wanted to test how much power a single recorded moment could hold against a practiced arrogance. The answer was complicated, but it was enough. How to spend them wisely. In the weeks after, strangers would come up to her at the bar. Some cried. Some shook her hand as if it were a medal. Many thanked her for posting the video, for saying, in a small but potent way, "This behavior is not invisible." "I didn't know how to speak up," a woman told her once. tears in her voice. You made it okay to tell the story. But the most important thing wasn't the public response. It was how she moved through her own skin after the storm. She cleaned glasses and poured drinks and learned new orders. She laughed when things were funny and let silence hold the name of the man who had thrown a drink. She allowed herself small, private acts of reclamation. A song she'd loved since college played on the bar's speaker, and she danced in the aisle between tables, ridiculous and fearless. A regular brought in a bouquet, no fanfare, a quiet applause. She kept the phone that had recorded his arrogance in a drawer, not to replay, but to remember that small tools can do big things. One night, months later, the captain came back. The bar had filled with the usual mix, laughter stitched with the clink of glasses, music low and confident. He stood at the doorway like a ghost invited by gossip. He was thinner in the face, his jaw less sure. He looked like a man who had been removed from a pedestal and had to learn to stand on ground that didn't tilt toward him. He hesitated in the doorway. The room registered him like a tide spotting a storm. Her eyes met his across the room, and nothing theatrical happened. She didn't gather witnesses. She didn't stage a confrontation. She smiled, the kind of smile that acknowledged history without letting it command the future. He walked up to the bar. For a second, the old instinct of being small to placate the big, of averting eyes, threatened to rise in her. She folded that instinct like a map and put it back in the drawer where old reflexes went to retire. "I'm sorry," he said, voice hollow in the way of someone who has learned what he lost. It was not the kind of apology she trusted. It was the kind someone gives when the consequences finally press practical pressure. She wiped a glass with a practiced motion, not rushing. Her hands were steady. "I heard about the investigation," she said. He nodded. "I was wrong. Words can be bridges. They can also be thin planks with gaps." She chose neither to build a bridge nor to burn a plank. She chose to keep the space between them honest. "I don't need an apology performed to me," she said. "I need behavior to change." He swallowed. "I'll do better." She set the glass down with a soft click. "Then do better," she said. "Not for me. For the women you'll meet who don't have a recorder in their hands." He stood there, the echo of his past arrogance trailing like a scent. He asked if he could buy a drink. She nodded and poured one, precise and careful. He paid. He left. Some people in the bar clapped, a reflexive gratitude that the moment had ended without blood. Others watched, balanced on that edge where narrative becomes real life. Later, as she closed the bar, she slid a small photo from behind the register into her wallet. It was of a woman who had taught her to breathe and to name things, now gray at the temples, laughing at some private joke. She would call her tomorrow and tell her how the storm had passed. The phone case lay in the drawer. Once in a while she would open it, not to seek the headline, but to remind herself that she had a choice. In a world that often assumed she would fold, she had found the strength not to be performatively brave, but to be quietly, insistently herself. Outside, the night had a softness to it. She stepped into the cool air and inhaled because she could. She had been made to freeze and found that the best response was not to mirror the freeze, but to move forward with clarity. The city hummed around her, and her footsteps fell steady, a measured cadence that belonged to someone who had learned the currency of names and how to spend them wisely.